You're listening to Tamez Labs' AI Creativity Series with Jack and Trip. We are exploring the latest AI tools to help you create quality work and avoid AI slop. On today's show, we're putting Google Omni and After Effects to the test to see if we can ship a real 60-second branded social spot for an indie apparel brand using a hybrid motion workflow. So we're shipping a 60-second branded social spot for an indie apparel brand. Real deliverable, not a mood reel, not a concept board. Something that goes to a client with a logo and a color grade and an edit that moves against music. And we're doing the visual heavy lift inside Gemini Omni, then handing everything to After Effects for the back half. That's the workflow. The question we're actually testing is, where does the human override happen? And what does it look like when it's working versus when it isn't?
The workflow architecture is simple enough to state in one sentence. Omni generates the shot-level clips, After Effects assembles, finishes, and delivers. But that sentence hides about 40% of the actual work, which is what makes this worth talking through. The handoff between those two layers is where the whole thing either holds together as a piece of craft or falls apart into a branded clip reel that nobody asked for.
The thing that changed with Omni, and this is what made me want to actually run this workflow, is that it's not a one-shot generator. You don't write a prompt, get a clip, and start over. You upload what you have, or start from a prompt, and then you revise through conversation. Change the jacket color, swap the background texture, push the camera angle, and critically, each change builds on the previous frame's data instead of regenerating from scratch. That's a different tool than anything I've used before for this kind of work.
That distinction matters structurally. Most AI video tools have been prompt and pray. You write something specific enough that maybe the third or fourth generation lands close to what you need, and then you export and move on. Omni is a stateful editor. The revision history is additive. That's not a marketing claim. It's a different workflow topology. For a branded spot where wardrobe consistency and environment continuity actually matter, that's a real capability shift.
Okay, so I go into this with a shot list. Lifestyle environment shots, product on body moments, one character and scene sequence I need to carry across a few different angles. And for the first two categories, Omni does what it claims. The conversational editing is real. I generated a street-level lifestyle shot, got it close in 3 turns, jacket color corrected, background texture dialed back from generic city to something with more texture. The within-shot consistency is solid. That part works.
That tracks with what the practitioner-adjacent sources are indicating. Character consistency within a single scene, within the multi-turn conversation, stable. The system holds because each edit is building on the previous frame's state. The problem is not within a shot. The problem is across shots.
Which is where the morning gets interesting. I take the same character into a different environment, different camera angle, different light source, and she starts drifting. Subtle things first. The texture on the jacket reads slightly different. Then the face, fine details around the eyes. By the third environment shot, she's close, but she's not the same person in a way that's going to hold on a 4,000 pixel screen. And for an apparel brand where the garment is literally the product, clothing texture drift is not an aesthetic note. That's a brand problem.
And that's the real constraint of current generation AI video in a multi-shot workflow. Omni's character consistency is genuinely better than what came before it, but better than previous tools and good enough for a commercial deliverable where the garment is the product are not the same bar. The motion designer's job at the AE stage is to evaluate each cut. Is this drift below the viewer's threshold of noticing, or does it need a compositing fix? That's a judgment call that requires knowing the brand and knowing what the audience is actually watching for. Omni cannot make that call.
The 10-second ceiling is the other constraint that shapes everything about how you plan this. 60 seconds of spot means a minimum of 6 Omni clips, and realistically more because you're trimming. The clips themselves can look good individually. The seams between them are entirely an AE problem. Exposure inconsistency across takes, color temperature drift between clips. I had 2 shots that Omni generated at noticeably different color temperatures because I'd varied the environment lighting in my prompts. Technically correct to the prompt, Completely wrong for the edit. Normalizing that across the sequence in AE took time. The more honest version is that it underestimated how much color continuity work lives in that second half of the workflow.
And that's a discipline failure that's easy to build into the workflow in advance if you know it's coming. The mistake is trying to solve color continuity inside Omni, asking it conversationally to match the warmth of the previous clip. That produces inconsistent results and burns quota. Color continuity belongs in AE full stop. Prompting discipline on the generation side means setting consistent lighting language from the start, not patching it later.
The quota question is real, especially for the kind of iteration this workflow actually requires. The compute-used model, refreshing every 5 hours, that's a meaningful wall if you're running heavy Omni sessions. Multiple versions of each shot, wardrobe iterations, in-painting passes. The working tier for commercial production is the AI Ultra at $100 a month. Anything below that, you're going to hit throttle limits mid-session on a real project. That number doesn't appear anywhere in the pitch decks, but it's the actual cost of the workflow.
The new Google Flow tools announced alongside Omni are worth naming here because they represent where this ecosystem is pointed. Flow Agent now supports batch editing, where changes propagate across all assets simultaneously, which is a direct parallel to expressions and pre-comp systems in After Effects. Flow Tools has vibe coding for custom video effects and animations. Both are early. Neither replaces AE for what we're describing.
But the direction of travel is clear. The AI generation layer is slowly reaching toward assembly and finishing capabilities that currently live entirely in traditional compositing software. That's a longer timeline than this workflow, but it matters for how you think about where to build skills right now. Let's talk about where the craft actually lives, because I think this is the part that gets lost when people describe this workflow as AI does the heavy lift. Omni generates footage. It does not know what the brand looks like in motion. The color grade that says whether this apparel brand is gritty or aspirational or raw, that's an AE call. The typography system, how the type tracks with the camera, whether the logo snaps in or drifts in, that's AE. The edit rhythm against the music, where the cut lands on the beat, how the pacing accelerates into the call to action. Omni doesn't hear the music. All of that is the human motion designer working in the back half of this pipeline.
Shot selection is the other one. Omni generates clips. It cannot tell you which clips are good. That requires knowing the brand, knowing what works on social, knowing what the sequence needs emotionally at that moment. And that's actually where I think most of the slop in assembled AI video comes from. Not the individual clip quality, which is getting better, but the editorial judgment of which clips belong together and why. 6 clips that each look fine in isolation, cut sequentially with a logo dropped on top. That's a demo reel. The difference between a demo reel and a branded spot is whether the edit has a point of view. That point of view does not live in any generation layer right now.
The watermark is worth saying out loud because it's one of those things that sounds obvious until it isn't. Every Omni export ships with a mandatory AI watermark. The AE cleanup pass is not optional. It is the ticket to delivery. Fast turnaround workflow, cleanup pass gets deprioritized, watermarked frame ships to a client. That's an immediate credibility failure. Build the pass into the template. It's not complex, it just has to happen every time.
The resolution question also deserves a direct answer. Omni's native export is 720p. The O3.1's upscaling pipeline brings it to 1080p and 4K. But based on what the release documentation actually says, it's not fully clear whether that upscaling step happens in-platform before export or requires an additional pass before AE import. That's an open production question, and an important one, because if you're scaling 720p source footage up inside AE composition settings rather than working from genuinely upscaled source material, you will see compression artifacts on a 4K screen. That's not an Omni failure. It's a workflow discipline failure. But it's the kind of failure that makes the final spot look cheap in a way that's hard to trace back to the source.
So where does this land? The workflow works. It shipped a spot. The AI generation layer handled the footage volume that would have required a location shoot, a camera operator, and a talent session. That's the real value proposition. Not AI replaces the motion designer, but AI replaces the production budget for the footage layer, so the motion designer can spend their time on the decisions that actually define the brand. The craft is not gone. It moved. It's in the seams, in the grade, in the edit, in the shot selection, in the AE work that nobody sees but everybody feels.
The practical version for working pros? Treat Omni as a footage source with a strong iterative editor built in. Do your within-shot refinement there. Do your color continuity, your editorial assembly, your brand system, your audio sync, and every compositing fix in AE. The handoff between those two layers is where the workflow discipline lives. Get that seam right, and the pipeline is genuinely capable. Get it wrong, and you'll ship something that looks like a lot of mid-tier DTC brands on Instagram. Technically competent, aesthetically anonymous, which is a very expensive way to look like everyone else. And that's our show. If you liked it, tap the follow button, rate us 5 stars, and share Tamez Labs with your friends. See you next week.
Grab news. Tamez.